America's grandmother.
The Bushes, both George and Barbara, really believe that the family which prays together stays together.
Barbara Bush, a wife and mother to 2 U.S. presidents, dies at age 92. We remember her legacy talking with one of her former speechwriters. North Korea meeting. President Trump confirms one of his officials met last week with Kim Jong-un. A parent's plea. The Pope meets the father of a terminally ill British child fighting to treat him at a Vatican hospital. And a gift with good taste. A priest from Kentucky has a unique present for Pope Francis. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, April 18th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Tonight, the country is mourning the matriarch of the Bush family. Former First Lady Barbara Bush died yesterday. She was 92. Her husband, former President George H.W. Bush, was at his wife's side when she died and had been holding her hand all day. They were married for 73 years. She was a dignified First Lady who behind the scenes was the steel in the Bush family spine. Barbara Bush spent 4 years with her husband George in the White House. She was gracious, yet approachable. To many, she was America's grandmother. Yet when America denied George Bush a second term, she didn't hide her disappointment, even long after he'd made his peace. Of course, it helped when her eldest son became president.
And now to see that same fellow that I used to drive around in Little League carpools and I used to yell at to please pick up his room, to see him as president, it's truly amazing.
He routinely mocked his mother as the family tyrant, lovingly, of course.
Mom is out of the hospital and everything is back to normal. After all, she's still telling me what to do.
She was born Barbara Pierce in New York in 1925, the third child in a wealthy publishing family. When she was 16, she met George Bush at a prep school dance. A year and a half later, they were engaged, but didn't marry until he returned from World War II, a hero bomber pilot. After the White House, the couple settled in Houston and Kennebunkport, Maine, where Barbara Bush focused on promoting literacy and spending time with her always adoring family. In her 1994 autobiography, Barbara Bush, a memoir, she touched on a controversial subject, saying, "I hate abortions, but just could not make that choice for someone else." Presidents, first ladies, and many others who knew Barbara Bush are praising her devotion to the nation, her family, and to literacy. Her son, George W., writes, in part, "Mom kept us on our toes and kept us laughing until the end. I'm a lucky man that Barbara Bush was my mother." The White House released this statement from President Trump. She will long be remembered for her strong devotion to country and family, both of which she served unfailingly well. The President and First Lady's thoughts and prayers are with the family and friends of Mrs. Bush. And the Obamas, right? Barbara Bush was the rock of a family dedicated to public service, and our thoughts and prayers are with both presidents and the entire Bush family. Before she passed away, her husband called Barbara a rock in the face of her failing health, worrying not for herself, thanks to her abiding faith, but for others. Private funeral services will be held this weekend at the Episcopal Church the Bushes regularly attend. First Lady Melania Trump will be there. Joining us now is Mary Kate Carey, former speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
You've known them for how many years now?
30, 25
years.
Yeah.
She really spoke her mind, which I found so refreshing. Do you remember when she said, "Jeb Bush, you shouldn't run because there are too many Bushes"?
Yes. Remember that?
Run, right?
Yes.
Who does that? What kind of mother does that?
Yeah, I heard a story this morning that she walked into Walker's Point and George W. Bush was lounging around and had his feet on a coffee table, and she said, "Get your feet off the table." And he said, "I'm President of the United States, aren't I allowed to have feet on the table?" And she said, "Not in my house."
There you go, right?
This is why people love her.
That's it, the realness of her.
Yeah.
not only did she speak her mind, but she had great faith. In her autobiography, Mrs. Bush wrote, "When all the dust is settled and all the crowds are gone," I'm going to get teary, "the things that matter are faith, family, and friends." What did you see as you were up close with them about their faith?
So I wrote in that Washington Post piece about Don Rhodes, who was an orphaned young man who had no family and was pretty much half deaf. And she saw that he had no family and took him in for the rest of his life. And they supported him, and again, he died before they did, which he didn't think would ever happen, and they scattered his ashes at their gravesite. So when she is buried on Saturday, she'll be next to Robin, and she'll be amidst Don Rhodes' ashes, so that they could be together. And to me, I've heard so many stories lately about her generosity, her compassion, and it all came down to broadening her definition of family. That if you didn't have a family, you could be part of theirs. And that is quite a family to open the doors to. And how lucky were those people that got taken in by the Bushes? There's so many stories of people who were taken in by them, and that to me is her faith in action.
Before we go, I have to talk about their love story. They were so in love. He was there holding her hand when she died. And what you wrote today in the Post was just beautiful.
She says that it was love at first sight on her part, and I'm sure it was on his as well. And they used to go to bed every night holding hands, arguing over who loved each other more. And she told me I won that argument every time. She was very, very protective of him. She moved their family 29 houses in 17 states with 6 children, 5 of whom survived. And all of those children turned out spectacularly. And I think it's a great love story of her devotion to him, that she was able to do that while he had these spectacular jobs that allowed him to become President of the United States. It's one of the great love stories in American history. You know, they beat the record set by John Adams and Abigail Adams. The Bushes are now the longest married presidential couple in American history, 73 years. And the Carters are close, but the Bushes are in first place.
Mary Kate Carey, former speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush, thank you for sharing your memories.
It's a fabulous life she led.
President Trump makes a surprising announcement. He confirms CIA Chief Mike Pompeo secretly met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The highly unusual meeting paves the way for the anticipated summit between the North Korean leader and the president. White House correspondent Mark Irons is following the developments from West Palm Beach, Florida, where the president is hosting Japan's prime minister. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have been meeting down at the president's Mar-a-Lago resort here in Palm Beach, Florida, focusing on how to end North Korea's nuclear weapons program. The president hopes to achieve that sometime in the next couple of months, when he would like to sit down with Kim Jong-un for a meeting. A date has not been set as of yet to confirm that is happening, but the president said just yesterday the U.S. and North Korea have already been in extremely high-level talks. And today we're learning a bit more about what exactly that means.
We'll be having meetings with Kim Jong-un very soon.
The president says 5 locations are under consideration for what will be a historic meeting between him and the North Korean leader. It could take place in early June. Now, the president revealing in an early morning tweet that preparations are underway. Trump writes, Mike Pompeo met with Kim Jong-un in North Korea last week. Meeting went very smoothly and a good relationship was formed. Details of summit are being worked out now. Denuclearization will be a great thing for the world, but also for North Korea. The announcement of Pompeo's visit with Kim comes as Trump's pick for Secretary of State awaits Senate approval. Some senators have shown hesitancy.
And I'm concerned about some of the positions that he's taken.
As Pompeo waits to see if he is confirmed, President Trump says a denuclearized North Korea would be good for the world, but he hasn't guaranteed his meeting with Kim will take place.
Let's see what happens. We'll either have a very good meeting or we won't have a good meeting. And maybe we won't even have a meeting at all, depending on what's going in. But I think that there's a great chance to solve a world problem.
If the president and Kim Jong-un meet, it will be the first ever summit between the U.S. and North Korea in more than 6 decades of hostilities since the Korean War. and that has been a major topic between President Trump and Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Florida. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting from West Palm Beach, Florida. It was a very public spat. The head of the president's economic team is apologizing to UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. Larry Kudlow says she was confused in announcing new sanctions against Russia. Ambassador Haley fought back, saying, "I don't get confused." Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The Trump administration is clarifying its position, saying Haley was right to say they're considering additional economic sanctions on Russia, but that a final decision has not been made yet. Haley and top officials here say Russia is complicit in an alleged chemical weapons attack in Syria's capital. The chief of a UN-backed chemical weapons watchdog group says his team still has not been allowed into the town of Douma, 11 days after an alleged toxic gas attack there killed 40 people. The team came under fire while trying to investigate the site. This man says he was in his basement during the attack. He says his family ran out of the house, not knowing the air was filled with gas. His wife, his brothers, and his mother all died. Syrian activists blame the government, but President Bashar Assad and his biggest ally, Russia, deny any involvement. Russian troops claim to have found a chemical weapons stockpile in Douma. They say it's not a government facility, however, but one belonging to the rebels. Jim Phillips, a Middle East expert, says he thinks Russia and Syria are trying to cover up their tracks.
They know, first of all, this is a war crime and that people can be prosecuted for this if evidence is found, which is one reason they're trying to keep the inspectors out.
Phillips also says Assad doesn't have enough troops to control his country, so he's used chemical weapons in the past to drive the rebels out. He says deadly attacks like these have driven 5 million Syrians out of the country. Russia says the U.S.-led strike over the weekend was a setback for long-term peace negotiations in Syria, but State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert says the attacks were justified. The United Nations says its special envoy to Syria will be talking with all key parties on all the sides facilitating more negotiations. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte says he personally ordered the arrest of a 71-year-old Australian nun. Agence France Presse reports the president made the comment during a speech today to soldiers, saying that nun has a shameless mouth. The Catholic sister was detained overnight and released today. She has been rallying on behalf of farmers and their land rights. The father of a terminally ill British toddler meets with Pope Francis. This is after an appeals court ruled that the child cannot be taken to Italy for further medical treatment.
He told me one thing, that I am right when I say that no one has the right to take anyone's life away from them apart from God. It's all in God's hands and it all remains in God's hands.
Tom Evans begged the Holy Father to make another bid for his son Alfie's life. Francis obliged, holding a minute of silent prayer for the toddler during his weekly general audience. Alfie's parents have been engaged in a legal fight with doctors over his care and want to send him to a Vatican hospital. Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliette, what exactly is the Evans family hoping the Pope can do for Alfie?
Mr. Evans was very clear, Lauren, in saying that he wants asylum to be granted to his son, so the family can take Alfie to the Vatican Children's Hospital Bambino Gesù just nearby, which has offered to care for him. Now, currently, the authorities of the hospital he is at in Liverpool are insisting the child's life support be withdrawn, claiming there is no hope that the child can survive.
What do Alfie's doctors in Britain say about his condition, and why is this case making headlines?
Well, Alfie suffers from a degenerative neurological condition, but there has been no exact diagnosis. So he's reportedly in a semi-vegetative state, and his parents, who are fervent Catholics, have been engaged in an ongoing legal fight with doctors to keep him alive. So earlier court rulings blocked further treatment and ordered life support to be switched off. And the case has garnered a lot of media coverage as the parents are insisting that their son is showing improvement, and therefore they would like to take him to another country where he could receive the medical treatment he is being refused in Britain. And I'm sure, Lauren, that we all remember well the Charlie Gard case, where another toddler whose life was at risk, despite the different circumstances, he sadly died after a protracted court fight. So this is the second intervention of Pope Francis in a similar case.
Well, this was also the Pope's second appeal this week for little Alfie. What does the family hope for? I know what they want, but are they optimistic?
Well, the hope is that the hospital in Liverpool could go back to the High Court and stop the order that they had requested to turn off his life support. Now, if that happens, the child could be free to travel to Rome and to receive treatment at the Vatican hospital. So that's what we are all hoping and praying will happen. And now that the Holy Father is helping and ramping up the campaign to save Alfie's life, perhaps hope is even greater than before, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up later in the show, we'll explore the Catholic approach to end-of-life issues. Dr. Gracie Christie will join us. Coming up, our report from the Summit on Religious Freedom with lawmakers and faith leaders. And Pope Francis tells the faithful why they should make the sign of the cross more often. Religious persecution is on the rise around the world. That's according to former Congressman Frank Wolf, sponsor of the International Religious Freedom Act. That landmark law is 20 years old this year and is being honored today in Washington, D.C. Jason Calvi reports. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. That 1998 law aimed to promote religious freedom in American foreign policy. It also set up the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, known as USERF. Now, today, former chairmen say they've accomplished a lot in 20 years, but much more remains to be done.
Former USERF chairman Leonard Leo says Western Europe is increasingly hostile to Christianity.
I think some of that is attributable to an increasing secularism. And the idea that religion is somehow intolerant toward others, when in fact, if you look at the course of human history, religion actually has been empowering in a lot of ways toward ensuring the dignity and worth of every human person.
Former Congressman Frank Wolf, the author of a law that tasks the U.S. with monitoring religious persecution worldwide, says the situation is dire.
Boko Haram has killed 21,000 Christians. 900 churches, Catholic and Protestant, have been destroyed.
Professor Robert George of Princeton tells me the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has helped countless people and communities.
If we can get a prisoner out of jail, return that prisoner to his family, those are achievements, those are victories. They're worth every ounce of energy and effort that we put into it. And yet when we look out at the macro level, we don't see all that much progress.
One case that's making headlines this week is North Carolina pastor Andrew Brunson. He's lived in Turkey for 2 decades, but was arrested on charges of spying in the aftermath of the failed 2016 coup. His senator, Tom Tillis, was there this week for Brunson's court hearing.
I don't think he should be in prison awaiting the next hearing, and I don't believe that justice was properly served today, but I hold out the hope that they'll move to the next hearing and he'll be exonerated.
The court in Turkey would not release Brunson. There will be another hearing next month. The State Department is talking with Congress about next steps if the pastor isn't freed. President Trump is also pushing for his release, yesterday tweeting, "Brunson is being persecuted for no reason." Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you. Nebraska cuts Medicaid benefits for the Sisters of Mercy, one of the oldest Catholic religious orders in the state. The nuns are appealing the decision through the Nebraska Department of Health. The state cites cost as a reason the sisters receive Medicaid in other states. Bishop David Foley, the former leader of the Birmingham, Alabama diocese, dies at age 88. He hosted Pillars of Faith on EWTN and served on the network's Board of Governors. EWTN Chairman and CEO Michael Warsaw says Bishop Foley was always known for his keen intellect, pastoral sensitivity, and powerful preaching. May he rest in peace. Up next, a Catholic doctor and parent explains the Church's view on end-of-life care. And a woman of letters. My personal interaction with the former First Lady, Barbara Bush. The Holy Father is closely following the case of Alfie Evans. That's the British toddler whose parents are seeking to further his medical treatment in Italy. And as we mentioned earlier, Pope Francis met today with his father, Tom Evans. The Holy Father also addressed the issue with pilgrims and tourists gathered for his weekly talk. Francis said, "I'd like to repeat and strongly confirm that the only owner of life from the beginning to its natural end is God." Joining us now to discuss end-of-life issues is Dr. Gracie Christie, Policy Advisor for the Catholic Association. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me again.
The case of 23-month-old Alfie Evans. They say he's in a semi-vegetative state. You can look at him right here. I've seen him yawn. I've seen his parents talking to him. They say further treatment would be futile, and his parents, though, have been unsuccessful in their court battles to move him to Rome to seek treatment. Why do you think Alfie's parents are appealing to the Pope?
I think that they feel safer and more comfortable with a Catholic medical ethic approach to their son's life. The Catholic medical ethic is very different from what they are experiencing under the state-run medical care of the UK, which sounds to me very much like a utilitarian ethic, which is done with the boy's life. They don't feel that there's any hope, and they are not willing to accompany the couple and that child to the end of the boy's natural life.
Let's talk about Catholic teaching, Gracie. Why do you think they are going in this direction, extraordinary versus ordinary care? Let's talk about that.
So we have in Catholicism a very detailed, very complicated, but very beautiful way of dealing with end-of-life issues, which is very deeply thought out. And the idea is that we use ordinary means to keep a person alive, the things that are ordinarily expected, like nutrition and oxygen and water, but that we don't have to use extraordinary means to prolong life, because as Catholics, we're not afraid of death. What we're afraid of is not supporting our brothers and sisters to the end of their natural life. So we draw a beautiful balance between rushing out of life or rushing someone out of life and not doing enough to accompany them.
It says, and we have this on the EWTN website, about end-of-life decisions, and we talk about the Catholic teaching, and it says, since the Middle Ages, Catholic theologians have recognized human beings are not morally obligated to undergo every possible medical treatment to save their lives. But that's not what's happening here, as you just described. Is that right?
Right, because as Catholics, we're not afraid of death. We see that it's the door to our real life, possibly, what we should regard as our real life. But I think it's very beautiful the way that Alfie Evans' parents are turning to the Catholic Church as a safe harbor to a place and an ideology that will take care of all of them, the mom, the dad, and the baby.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gracie Christie, Senior Advisor to the Catholic Association.
Thank you.
Pope Francis says the sign of the cross marks us as Christians, and we should make it often.
E come facciamo entrando in chiesa, possiamo farlo anche a casa.
The Holy Father says the cross is the badge that shows who we are and who we belong to, and urges us to make the gesture during our daily activities. Pappy for the Pope. A Catholic priest from Kentucky was at the Vatican last week, and he brought him a delicacy from his home state. The gift? A bottle of bourbon, specifically a bottle of 23-year-old Pappy Van Winkle. Father Jim Sitchko says the Pope liked the present. You see them in a selfie here, calling it very good bourbon. Father Sitchko was in Rome as one of the Holy Father's missionaries of mercy. Finally tonight, my personal story about Barbara Bush. After interviewing her husband at his presidential library in Texas, well after he left the White House, they invited me to come in to their private residence. I told them an Ashburn family favorite story. On a below-freezing day in the early 90s, to keep warm, my parents wore their pajamas under their clothes as we toured the White House. She took my reporter's notebook and wrote the following. Dear Ellen, I am so enjoying your daughter. Have a great year. Barbara Bush. And she ends with, "No PJs in the White House." I was amazed that she took the time to do that. And that note is hanging on the wall in my parents' house in Pennsylvania. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless.